They say black boys become men at 18. I became one at 18 when I realized that on my birthday, I could either walk away from the foster care system that had failed me, or I could fight to save the 4 younger kids who were still trapped in it. My name is Jaden Harris, and this is the story of how I brought down a foster care fraud operation that had been stealing money meant for children while treating us worse than animals. My story starts when I was 8 years old, and my mother died from a drug overdose in a motel room on the south side of Chicago. I do not remember much about the days immediately after they found her body, but I remember a social worker named Mrs. Patterson explaining to me that I would be going to live with a nice family, who would take care of me until they could find relatives who might want me. "Jaden," she said in that overly cheerful voice that adults use when they are trying to make terrible news sound acceptable. The Williams family are experienced foster parents who have been helping children for many years. They are going to make sure you have everything you need. What Mrs. Patterson did not tell me was that the Williams family was running a business, and that business was collecting monthly checks from the state for housing foster children while spending as little money as possible on our actual care. Robert and Linda Williams lived in a large 4-bedroom house in what looked like a decent neighborhood. From the outside, everything appeared normal: well-maintained lawn, 2 cars in the driveway, decorative flower boxes on the front porch. But appearances can be deceiving, especially when people are getting paid to maintain them. When I arrived at the Williams house in September 2013, there were already 3 other foster children living there. Marcus, who was 12, Destiny, who was 10, and little Kevin, who was only 6 years old. A few months later, they took in Aaliyah, who was 9. All of us were black children from similar backgrounds, parents who had died from drugs, been incarcerated, or simply disappeared from our lives. The Williams family presented themselves to social workers and neighbors as devoted Christian parents who were called by God to help disadvantaged children. Robert Williams was 45, worked as a postal supervisor, and served as a deacon at their Baptist church. Linda Williams was 42, worked part-time as a medical receptionist, and taught Sunday school. To anyone watching from the outside, they seemed like the perfect foster family. But behind closed doors, the Williams house was a place where children existed solely to generate income for adults who saw us as business assets rather than human beings. Each of us generated between $800 and $1,200 per month in foster care payments, depending on our ages and any special needs we might have. With 5 foster children in the house, the Williams family was receiving approximately $4,500 per month from the state, tax-free money that was supposed to cover our food, clothing, medical care, school supplies, and other necessities. Instead, they spent that money on themselves while we lived like prisoners in our own supposed home. Our daily routine was designed around maintaining the illusion that we were well cared for while minimizing any actual expenses on our behalf. We woke up at 5:30 a.m. every weekday to clean the house before school. We were each assigned specific rooms and tasks. I was responsible for vacuuming the living room and dining room. Marcus cleaned the kitchen. Destiny cleaned the bathrooms. Aaliyah dusted the furniture. And little Kevin picked up trash in the yard. If any of our chores were not completed to Linda Williams' satisfaction, we lost meals. Not snacks or desserts, actual meals. I cannot count the number of times I went to school hungry because I had missed a spot while vacuuming or because Marcus had left water spots on the bathroom mirror. Children need to learn responsibility and consequences, Linda Williams would say when social workers asked about our chore schedule during their monthly visits. We believe in teaching them a strong work ethic. What she did not mention was that we were doing all the household maintenance while she spent her days shopping and getting her nails done with the money she was supposed to be spending on us. Our meals consisted mainly of cheap, processed foods that could be bought in bulk and prepared with minimal effort. Breakfast was usually off-brand cereal with powdered milk. Lunch was a peanut butter sandwich and a piece of fruit if we were lucky. Dinner was typically boxed mac and cheese, instant mashed potatoes, or canned ravioli. Meanwhile, Robert and Linda Williams ate restaurant meals ordered takeout, and kept premium foods in a locked refrigerator in their bedroom that we were forbidden to touch. Children do not need fancy food, Robert Williams would say when neighbors or church members asked about our diet. Simple, nutritious meals build character. But there was nothing nutritious about our meals. We were all underweight, frequently sick, and constantly hungry. I remember being so desperate for food that I would sometimes steal crackers from the school cafeteria and hide them in my backpack to share with the younger kids when we got home. Our clothing situation was even worse. We each owned 3 or 4 outfits, most of which came from Goodwill or garage sales. The Williams would buy us new clothes only when absolutely necessary to maintain appearances, and those purchases were always the cheapest options available. For school events or social worker visits, Linda Williams would dress us in the good clothes, relatively decent outfits that she kept in her closet and brought out only when outsiders were watching. As soon as the event was over or the social worker left, we had to change back into our regular worn-out clothes. "We teach these children not to be materialistic," Linda Williams would explain to anyone who asked about our appearance. "Too many kids today think they need designer clothes and expensive shoes." What she did not mention was that she was wearing $200 shoes while we walked to school in sneakers with holes in the soles. Our sleeping arrangements were designed to fit as many children as possible into the smallest amount of space. Marcus and I shared a bunk bed in what had probably originally been a storage room. Destiny and Aaliyah shared another bunk bed in a room that also served as Linda Williams' home office. Little Kevin slept on an air mattress in the same room as the girls. None of us had dressers or personal storage space. Our few belongings were kept in cardboard boxes under our beds. We were not allowed to have personal decorations, posters, or anything that might make the space feel like it belonged to us. "Children do not need a lot of material possessions," Robert Williams would say when social workers asked about our living conditions during their inspections. "We focus on providing love and stability rather than accumulating things." But there was no love in that house, and the only stability was the consistent neglect and emotional abuse we experienced every day. The Williams had rules designed to maintain control and minimize any expenses related to our care. We were not allowed to use the main bathroom. We had to use a small half bathroom in the basement that was often filthy and sometimes had no hot water. We were not allowed to watch television except for 1 hour on Sunday afternoons. We were not allowed to make phone calls, receive mail, or have friends over to the house. Most importantly, we were strictly forbidden from discussing our living conditions with anyone outside the house, including teachers, social workers, or other adults who might ask questions. If anyone asks you about your life here, you tell them how grateful you are for everything we provide. Linda Williams would remind us before school each morning. You tell them about the nice house you live in, the food we give you, and how much we care about you. What if they ask specific questions? Destiny once asked. You tell them that we treat you just like our own children. And you remember that children who cause problems for their foster families often end up in group homes or juvenile facilities where things are much worse. The threat of being sent somewhere worse was constantly hanging over our heads. We had all heard horror stories about group homes and residential facilities where children were abused, neglected, or worse. As bad as our situation was with the Williams family, we were afraid that speaking up might lead to something even more terrible. But as I got older, I started to understand that what was happening to us was not normal, and it was not legal. During my sophomore year of high school, I had a social studies teacher named Mr. Rodriguez who taught a unit on civil rights and social justice. One day, he was talking about people who had fought against injustice even when it was dangerous or difficult to do so. "The most important thing to understand," Mr. Rodriguez said, "is that injustice thrives when good people stay silent. Every time someone chooses to speak up against wrongdoing, they make it a little bit harder for bad people to get away with hurting others." After class, I approached Mr. Rodriguez with a hypothetical question. "Mr. Rodriguez, what would happen if someone knew that children were being mistreated? but they were afraid to report it because they might get in trouble or make their situation worse. Mr. Rodriguez studied my face carefully. Jaden, are you asking this question for a friend, or are you asking for yourself? For a friend. Well, you can tell your friend that there are laws designed to protect children who report abuse or neglect. And you can tell your friend that sometimes the most courageous thing a person can do is speak up for people who cannot speak up for themselves. But what if the adults who are supposed to be helping do not believe the children? Then your friend needs to find adults who will believe them. And your friend needs to remember that staying silent does not protect anyone. It only protects the people who are doing wrong. That conversation planted a seed in my mind that grew stronger over the following months. I started paying closer attention to how the Williams family operated, and I started documenting the things I observed. I noticed that Linda Williams drove a brand new SUV while telling social workers that money was tight. I noticed that they took expensive vacations during school breaks while leaving us with a babysitter who was paid to make sure we did not leave the house. I noticed that they had premium cable television, high-end electronics, and other luxury items that seemed inconsistent with their claims about financial limitations. Most importantly, I started to understand that the Williams family was committing fraud by collecting money from the state that was supposed to be used for our care while actually spending that money on themselves. Marcus, I said to my foster brother one evening as we were lying in our bunk beds, do you know how much money the state gives foster families for each kid? No. Why? I looked it up at the school library. They get about $1,000 per month for each of us. That means they are getting $5,000 every month just for having us live here. That is a lot of money. Marcus, think about how much they spend on us. Cheap food, used clothes, no activities, no toys, no treats. I bet they spend maybe $200 per month on all 5 of us combined. So where does the rest of the money go? Their new car, their vacations, their fancy clothes, their restaurant meals. They are stealing money that is supposed to be for us. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Jaden, what can we do about it? We're just kids. I do not know yet, but I am going to figure something out. As my 18th birthday approached, I realized that I would soon age out of the foster care system. Once I turned 18, I would no longer be eligible for foster care placement, which meant I would have to find my own place to live and support myself. But it also meant that I would no longer be under the control of the Williams family, and I would be free to speak up about what I had witnessed without fear of being sent to a worse placement. 2 weeks before my birthday, I started making plans. I spent hours at the school library researching foster care fraud, documenting evidence of the Williams family's financial crimes, and identifying the appropriate authorities to contact. I learned that foster care fraud was a federal crime that could result in serious prison sentences and substantial financial penalties. I also learned that there were protections for people who reported fraud against government programs, including financial rewards for whistleblowers whose information led to successful prosecutions. More importantly, I learned that the younger children in the Williams house could be removed immediately if authorities found evidence of abuse or neglect. On my 18th birthday, I woke up knowing that this was the day I would either find the courage to fight for the kids who were still trapped, or I would walk away and try to forget about the injustices I had witnessed. The Williams family did not acknowledge my birthday in any way. No cake, no gifts, no celebration. Linda Williams simply reminded me that I had 30 days to find alternative housing arrangements now that I was no longer eligible for foster care. Jaden, you are an adult now, she said while counting a stack of bills at the kitchen table. It is time for you to start taking responsibility for your own life. Looking at her sitting there with money that should have been spent on the children she was supposed to be caring for, I made my decision. That afternoon, I walked to the nearest police station and asked to speak with someone about reporting foster care fraud. I need to report foster parents who are stealing money from the state and neglecting the children in their care, I told the desk sergeant. Son, that sounds like something for Child Protective Services or the FBI. Let me get you the right phone numbers. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a small office at the FBI field office, talking to Special Agent Sarah Martinez about the Williams family's operation. "Mr. Harris," Agent Martinez said after I finished explaining the situation, "what you are describing sounds like a systematic fraud scheme. How long has this been going on?" "For at least the 10 years I have been living there, and probably longer." "And you said there are currently 4 other children in the home?" "Yes, ma'am. Marcus is 16, Destiny is 14, Aaliyah is 13, and Kevin is 10. Are these children in immediate physical danger?" "They are not being beaten, but they are being neglected. They are undernourished, they do not have adequate clothing, and they are living in substandard conditions while the foster parents use their support money for personal expenses." Agent Martinez took detailed notes as I described specific examples of the Williams family's fraudulent behavior. She was particularly interested in their financial situation and their lifestyle compared to how they treated us. "Mr. Harris, would you be willing to help us gather evidence of this fraud?" "What kind of evidence?" "We would need documentation of their spending patterns, records of how the children are actually being treated, and proof that the money designated for child care is being used for other purposes." "How would I get that kind of evidence?" "We could provide you with recording equipment and teach you how to document conversations and activities safely. However, I need to warn you that this could be dangerous if the Williams family realizes what you are doing." "Agent Martinez, I am 18 years old as of today. I could walk away from this situation and never look back. But there are 4 kids still living in that house who do not have that option. If I do not help them, who will? Are you sure you want to take this risk?" "I am sure." The next 2 weeks were the most intense of my life. Agent Martinez provided me with small recording devices that looked like regular pens and taught me how to document the Williams family's activities without arousing suspicion. I recorded conversations in which Linda Williams discussed using foster care money to pay for personal expenses. I documented the difference between the food they ate and the food they fed us. I took pictures of our living conditions compared to their living spaces. I gathered receipts and financial documents that showed how they were spending money that was supposed to be designated for child care. Most importantly, I convinced Marcus, Destiny, and Aaliyah to talk on tape about their experiences living with the Williams family. Little Kevin was too young to understand what was happening, but the 3 older kids were able to provide detailed accounts of the neglect and mistreatment they had experienced. "Jaden," Marcus said during one of our recorded conversations, "I am scared about what will happen if we get caught doing this." "Marcus, I am scared too. But I am more scared about what will happen if we do not do anything. You're going to be stuck here for 2 more years. Destiny has 4 more years. Aaliyah has 5 more years. Kevin has 8 more years. Do you want them to live like this for that long?" "No, but what if they send us somewhere worse?" "Marcus, there are good foster families out there. There are people who actually care about helping kids instead of just collecting money. But as long as people like the Williams get away with fraud, the good families do not get the resources they need to help children." "You really think this will work?" "I think it has to work. Because the alternative is letting them keep hurting kids for years to come." 2 weeks after my initial meeting with Agent Martinez, the FBI was ready to move forward with their investigation. They had gathered enough evidence to obtain search warrants for the Williams house and financial records. On a Tuesday morning in late March, I was walking to school when I saw several FBI vehicles and Child Protective Services cars parked in front of the Williams house. Neighbors were standing on their porches watching as agents carried boxes of documents and computers out of the house. My phone buzzed with a text message from Agent Martinez. "Foster children are safe and in protective custody. Williams family in federal custody. Well done." That afternoon, I met with Agent Martinez and a CPS supervisor to discuss what would happen next. "Mr. Harris," the CPS supervisor said, "the 4 children have been removed from the Williams home and are currently in emergency foster care with families who have been thoroughly vetted. They are safe, they are being well fed, and they are receiving medical evaluations to assess their health status." What about the Williams family? Robert and Linda Williams have been charged with federal wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and child neglect, Agent Martinez said. If convicted, they could face up to 20 years in federal prison. What happens to the kids long term? We will work to find permanent placements for all of them, the CPS supervisor explained. Because of their ages and the trauma they have experienced, it may take some time, but our goal is to place them with families who can provide the love and stability they deserve. The trial of Robert and Linda Williams began 6 months later, and it attracted significant media attention as details of their fraud scheme became public. The investigation revealed that they had been operating their foster care business for over 15 years, during which time they had collected more than $800,000 in foster care payments while providing substandard care to dozens of children. The defendants treated vulnerable children as sources of income rather than human beings deserving of love and protection, the federal prosecutor said during opening arguments. They systematically defrauded the foster care system while neglecting the basic needs of the children in their care. During the trial, I testified about my experiences living with the Williams family and the evidence I had helped gather. It was difficult to relive those years of neglect and mistreatment, but I knew that my testimony was necessary to ensure that justice was served. Mr. Harris, the prosecutor asked during my testimony, why did you decide to report the Williams family to authorities? Because I realized that staying silent would not protect me or the other kids. It would only protect the people who were hurting us. And I knew that if I did not speak up, they would keep collecting money for taking care of children while actually neglecting them. Were you afraid of the consequences of reporting them? Yes, I was terrified, but I was more afraid of what would happen to Marcus, Destiny, Aaliyah, and Kevin if nobody ever held the Williams family accountable for what they were doing. The defense attorneys tried to portray Robert and Linda Williams as well-meaning people who had made mistakes in judgment, but the evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showed that they had spent foster care money on luxury items, vacations, and personal expenses while providing minimal care for the children in their custody. Medical examinations of the 4 younger children revealed that all of them were undernourished and showed signs of long-term neglect. Dental records indicated that none of them had received proper medical or dental care during their time with the Williams family. Robert Williams was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Linda Williams was sentenced to 10 years. They were also ordered to pay restitution of more than $400,000 to the state and federal governments. The defendants betrayed the trust placed in them by the foster care system and the children who depended on them, the judge said during sentencing. Their actions were motivated by greed rather than any genuine desire to help vulnerable children. The investigation also led to reforms in the local foster care system, including more frequent unannounced inspections, better oversight of foster family finances, and improved training for social workers to recognize signs of neglect and abuse. Marcus, Destiny, Aaliyah, and Kevin were all placed with new foster families who provided them with the love, stability, and opportunities they deserved. Marcus graduated high school with honors and received a full scholarship to study engineering. Destiny became involved in student government and plans to study social work. Aaliyah discovered a talent for art and wants to become a graphic designer. Kevin, who was the youngest, has blossomed into a confident, happy child who loves playing soccer and reading. Jaden, Marcus said to me during his high school graduation party, I need to thank you for what you did. If you had not spoken up, I might still be living in that house, sleeping on a broken bunk bed and eating cereal for dinner. Marcus, you do not need to thank me. You were brave enough to help me gather evidence and testify at the trial. We all fought for each other. But you were the one who made the decision to report them, even though you could have just aged out of the system and walked away. I could not walk away knowing that you guys were still trapped there. That is what I mean. You chose to protect us instead of protecting yourself. That is what family does. Today, I am 23 years old and working as a social worker specializing in foster care oversight. My experience with the Williams family taught me that the foster care system can be both a source of salvation and a source of exploitation for vulnerable children, depending on the integrity of the adults involved. I work with state agencies to develop better screening procedures for prospective foster families, and I help train social workers to recognize signs of fraud and neglect. I also work with older foster children to educate them about their rights and encourage them to speak up when they are being mistreated. The most important thing you need to understand, I tell teenagers who are aging out of foster care, is that you have the power to make a difference. You can choose to walk away from the injustices you have experienced, or you can choose to fight for the kids who are still trapped in bad situations. My relationship with Marcus, Destiny, Aaliyah, and Kevin remains strong. We consider ourselves siblings, bonded by shared trauma, but strengthened by our decision to fight for each other. They all call me on my birthday to remind me that turning 18 was not just the day I became an adult. It was the day I chose to become a protector. The Williams family's fraud operation was not unique. According to FBI investigations, foster care fraud costs taxpayers millions of dollars every year and subjects thousands of vulnerable children to neglect and abuse. But prosecutions are relatively rare because children are often afraid to speak up, and adults tend to assume that foster families are automatically trustworthy. The children who survive these situations have a responsibility to use their experiences to protect other children. Agent Martinez told me during a recent conversation, "Your willingness to speak up probably prevented dozens of other children from being placed with the Williams family." As I reflect on my decision to report the Williams family, I realize that turning 18 was just the beginning of my journey toward manhood. The real test was not reaching a certain age. It was choosing to use whatever power I had to protect people who could not protect themselves. The Williams family spent 15 years stealing money that was supposed to help vulnerable children, while treating those same children as sources of income rather than human beings deserving of love and respect. They were allowed to continue their fraud for so long because children were afraid to speak up, adults were reluctant to believe children's accusations, and the system lacked adequate oversight. But sometimes all it takes is one person who is willing to say this is wrong, and I will not stay silent, to bring down an entire network of abuse and exploitation. On my 18th birthday, I made a choice between self-preservation and moral responsibility. I chose moral responsibility, and that choice changed not only my life, but the lives of 4 other children who deserved better than what they were receiving. The house where we lived with the Williams family has since been sold, and the new owners have no idea about the fraud and neglect that occurred there for over a decade. But Marcus, Destiny, Aaliyah, Kevin, and I will always remember what we survived in that house, and what we accomplished by refusing to stay silent about it. Sometimes being a man means recognizing that your comfort and safety are less important than the welfare of people who depend on you for protection. Sometimes being a man means choosing to fight battles that you could easily avoid, because avoiding them would mean allowing injustice to continue. The Williams family thought they could exploit vulnerable children indefinitely because they assumed those children would never have the courage or opportunity to fight back. They were wrong about that assumption, and their miscalculation cost them their freedom and their reputation. Today, Marcus is studying to become an engineer, Destiny wants to be a social worker, Aaliyah is pursuing art, and Kevin is thriving in middle school. They all have bright futures ahead of them because someone was willing to speak up when speaking up was dangerous and difficult. And that is the most important lesson I learned from my experience in foster care. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to accept that suffering is inevitable. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is believe that your voice matters, even when you are just 18 years old and everyone around you is telling you to stay quiet. The foster care system saved my life by removing me from a dangerous situation when I was 8 years old. But the foster care system also nearly destroyed my life by placing me with people who saw me as a source of income rather than a child who needed love and protection. That contradiction taught me that systems are only as good as the people who operate them, and that fighting for reform is an ongoing responsibility rather than a one-time effort. There are still children living with foster families who care more about monthly checks than monthly hugs. There are still adults who see vulnerable children as business opportunities rather than young people deserving of stability and love. But there are also people like Agent Martinez, who took my accusations seriously and helped me gather evidence. There are people like Mr. Rodriguez, who taught me that injustice thrives when good people stay silent. There are people like the foster families who took in Marcus, Destiny, Aaliyah, and Kevin and showed them what real family love looks like. The difference between exploitation and protection often comes down to one person who is willing to speak up when speaking up is hard. One person who is willing to fight when fighting seems impossible. One person who is willing to risk their own comfort to protect someone else's welfare. On my 18th birthday, I became that person, and that decision has defined who I am as a man ever since. There are more stories like mine, guys who refused to stay silent, who broke the cycle instead of repeating it. 2 of them are right here on your screen. Click the one that speaks to your own fight. And if you want to walk with a community that knows sometimes saving your family means stopping them, tap the bell. I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.